Women's fight for the vote. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, women in many countries around the world fought for the right to vote. This movement, known as the suffrage movement, was a long and difficult struggle that lasted for decades. In this video, we will explore the history of the suffrage movement, the key figures involved, and the impact it had on women's rights. The suffrage movement began in the mid-19th century when women in the United States and Europe started to demand the right to vote. At the time, women were not considered equal to men and were often denied basic rights and opportunities. They were not allowed to own property, attend college, or even control their own wages. The suffrage movement was led by a group of courageous women who were determined to change the status quo. They organized rallies, marches, and protests, and worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the need for women's suffrage. The suffrage movement faced many obstacles along the way. Many people, including some women, believed that women were not capable of participating in politics and that their place was in the home. Others feared that giving women the right to vote would lead to social upheaval and the breakdown of traditional gender roles. Despite these challenges, the suffrage movement continued to grow and gain momentum. Women from all walks of life joined the cause, including working-class women, middle-class women, and even some wealthy women who had the means to support the movement financially. The suffrage movement also had its share of male supporters who recognized the injustice of denying women the right to vote. These men worked alongside women in the movement, providing financial support, organizing rallies, and speaking out in favor of women's suffrage. The suffrage movement was not without its setbacks and disappointment. Women were often met with violence and harassment when they protested, and many were arrested and jailed for their activism. But despite these challenges, the suffrage movement persevered, and eventually, women won the right to vote in many countries around the world. In the next segment, we will explore the early years of the suffrage movement and the key figures who helped to shape it. The early years of the suffrage movement were marked by small-scale protests and individual acts of resistance. Women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony in the United States, and Millicent Fawcett and Emmeline Pankhurst in the United Kingdom were among the first to speak out in favor of women's suffrage. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were two of the most prominent figures in the early suffrage movement in the United States. They met in 1851 and quickly became close friends and collaborators. Together, they founded the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869, which aimed to secure voting rights for women. Millicent Fawcett was a leading suffragist in the United Kingdom. She founded the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies in 1897, which was a peaceful and non-violent organization that aimed to achieve women's suffrage through peaceful means. Emmeline Pankhurst was a British suffragette who founded the Women's Social and Political Union in 1903. The WSPU was a militant organization that used tactics such as hunger strikes, arson, and window smashing to draw attention to the cause of women's suffrage. These key figures in the suffrage movement were instrumental in shaping the early years of the movement and laying the groundwork for future activism. They inspired countless women to join the cause and helped to raise awareness about the need for women's suffrage. The suffrage movement also had its share of detractors who opposed the idea of women's suffrage and worked to undermine the movement. Anti-suffrage groups argued that women were not suited for political participation and that granting them the right to vote would lead to social upheaval. In the next segment, we will explore the tactics used by suffragettes and suffragists to advance the cause of women's suffrage. The suffrage movement used a variety of tactics and strategies to advance the cause of women's suffrage. Some suffragists and suffragettes used peaceful means, such as petitions, speeches, and rallies, while others employed more militant tactics, such as hunger strikes, arson, and window smashing. In the United States, suffragists used peaceful means to advance the cause of women's suffrage. They organized rallies and marches, and they lobbied politicians to support women's suffrage. They also used petitions to gather support for the cause and to demonstrate the widespread support for women's suffrage. In the United Kingdom, suffragettes used more militant tactics to draw attention to the cause of women's suffrage. They smashed windows, set fire to buildings, and even went on hunger strikes to protest their treatment in prison. Suffragettes' militant tactics were controversial, and they were often met with violence and harassment from the police and anti-suffrage groups. However, their actions helped to draw attention to the cause of women's suffrage and to demonstrate the urgency of the issue. In other countries, such as Australia and New Zealand, suffragists used a combination of peaceful and militant tactics to advance the cause of women's suffrage. In Australia, suffragists organized a series of strikes and protests, while in New Zealand, suffragists used petitions and peaceful demonstrations to gain support for women's suffrage. Despite the differences in tactics and strategies used by suffragists and suffragettes around the world, they all share the common goal: to secure voting rights for women and to achieve greater equality between men and women. In the next segment, we will explore the impact of the suffrage movement on women's rights and the legacy of the movement today. The suffrage movement had a profound impact on women's rights and on society as a whole. It helped to pave the way for greater gender equality and to challenge traditional gender roles and expectations. The suffrage movement also helped to inspire other social and political movements, such as the civil rights movement and the LGBTQ rights movement. It demonstrated the power of collective action and the importance of fighting for justice and equality. The suffrage movement also had a lasting impact on women's political participation. Today, women around the world have the right to vote and to participate in politics, thanks in large part to the efforts of suffragists and suffragettes. However, the fight for gender equality is far from over. Women still face many challenges and barriers, including unequal pay, discrimination, and violence. The legacy of the suffrage movement reminds us of the importance of continuing to fight for women's rights and for greater gender equality. The suffrage movement also reminds us of the power of collective action and the importance of standing up for what we believe in. It shows us that change is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The suffrage movement was a long and difficult struggle, but it was also a triumph of human spirit and determination. It serves as a reminder of the strength and resilience of women and of the power of solidarity and activism. In conclusion, the suffrage movement was a pivotal moment in the history of women's rights and of human rights more broadly. It helped to pave the way for greater gender equality and to challenge traditional gender roles and expectations. Its legacy continues to inspire us today, as we work towards a more just and equal world for all. The suffrage movement was a long and difficult struggle, but it was also a triumph of human spirit and determination. It demonstrated the power of collective action and the importance of standing up for what we believe in. The suffrage movement faced many obstacles along the way, including violence, harassment, and opposition from anti-suffrage groups. But despite these challenges, the suffrage movement persevered, and eventually, women won the right to vote in many countries around the world. The legacy of the suffrage movement reminds us of the importance of continuing to fight for women's rights and for greater gender equality. It shows us that change is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As we continue to work towards a more just and equal world, we must remember the lessons of the suffrage movement. We must stand up for what we believe in, and we must work together to create a better future for all. Thank you for watching this video on the suffrage movement and the fight for women's right to vote. We hope that it has inspired you to take action and to continue the work of those who came before us.